Welcome to the Property Voice Podcast, helping you to navigate safely through the world of property investing. Get the lowdown and updates, insights and outcomes on all matters property with a splash of entertainment along the way. The Property Voice, a voice to trust among the crowd. Now, let's get started with your host, Richard Brown.
Hello there and welcome to another edition of the Property Voice Podcast. My name, as ever, is Richard Brown, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you join us today. Now, I'm happy to use the word us, as yes, Kaza is back. She is here. So Kaza, how are you and how have you been?
Hi Richard, it feels good to be back. Thank you for asking. I had a week off and then I think you were away fighting crocodiles and chasing piranha fish in the jungle or something like that, I believe. So, in order to make up for lost time, let me tell the listeners what they can expect on today's show. Today's property chatter is all about power. Well, it's about knowledge really, but of course we know that with knowledge comes power. Then in the Your Voice segment, we can share another fantastic listener review and a listener answer to our one thing question posed through social media this week too. Finally, as always, we have a great resource for you in the shout out. But enough of me, I will hand back to you, Richard, for this week's property chatter.
Okay, so let's get on with this week's featured topic with Property Chatter.
Well, thank you so much, Kaza, for setting up the show so nicely. I really have missed you, actually. So crocodiles and piranhas. Yes, I was chasing them around the Amazon last time out, and obviously that's why we couldn't get together. But I did make it back in one piece. Well, when I say one piece, it was minus the odd bit of drop of blood due to a couple of insect bites. But that's a story perhaps for another day that I'll share with you. So on to today's topic then. Which is all about knowledge. And when I say knowledge, I'm not talking about the London taxi variety, but the who, what and where variety in property investing instead. You know, they say it's not what you know, but who you know that counts. But equally, others say that knowledge can set you free. So let's try and combine these two apparently opposite perspectives to understand how we can make progress in our property investing journey. This topic is aligned to section 4 in my book, the Property Investor Toolkit, if you happen to be following along. And this section in the book actually has literally over 100 links to external resources to go to. So you know, it's actually pretty much a giant shout-out segment in its own right. So I can point you to that. It's got plenty of external resources there. Now, I'm not going to repeat all of the content that's in the book here, and therefore what I want to do is to highlight on some of the merits of staying informed and connected, and why enlisting the support of others can be helpful to us. So today's topic lends itself to be broken down into two clear sections, which are people and knowledge. However, as we progress, we'll perhaps see that they are in fact perhaps linked together more closely than we might imagine. So starting with people then, anyone that's invested in property for any length of time can tell you that it can get a little bit lonely at times. Unless you happen to be the well-known type, such as the HMO landlady Serena Thompson, for example, or at least someone who operates it in a way that she does, where she, and others like her are very active and hands-on in dealing with their tenants, and cups of tea and chats and this sort of thing is order and par for the day. So in that type of investment role, then perhaps you are actually engaging with people on a much larger scale. But for the average property investor, certainly with a small number of properties, certainly with, say, single-let properties, then that isn't usually what is going to happen. There's actually very little human contact, and so there is a need at times for this human contact and some companionship and shared interest. And if you've ever tried talking to your mates down the pub, or your parents potentially, about property investing, then many of them have some preset ideas and opinions, of course. Now some of them can be well informed, whereas others, and I would have to say the large majority, might not be. The acid test here is whether they are themselves experienced investors over probably an extended period of time or not. And if they are, then you're in luck, as that is the very first property network that you can join in with. Now, I've just mentioned a phrase, of course, property network, and this gives us a clue as to why and how associating with property investors can be of benefit to us. So what are the main benefits in joining in with the property community and hanging out with other property investors then? Well, here's some of the benefits that I could think of at least. And, just running for the list, we've got friendship and companionship, and I've just mentioned that point. So, we start to rub shoulders with people who have similar interests and outlooks to us. There's the mutual support and encouragement that we can get from hanging around in that same community. We can share ideas and get answers to questions, and also we can give something back. It's not all take. We can give something back too. Then we also have access to what I call subject matter experts, people who know what they're talking about, and that could be professionals, but it could also be other service providers in the wider property community as well. The opportunity then exists for us to see role models, which in turn can give us increased confidence and potentially inspiration to go on and copy or mirror some of what those role models are doing themselves. Of course, we'll have access to some of the tips and tricks of the trade, but also some of the pitfalls and the lessons learned as well. Equally, and on the theme of knowledge to some extent, it allows us to keep up to date with the latest trends and strategies. And a point I'm going to come back to a little later, but I'll mention now just to add to the list, was finding buddies, mastermind groups or coaches and mentors to support our journey. And I'll explain perhaps why that's important a little bit later on. So these are just some of the reasons why joining a property community can help us. So returning a minute to the concept of a network. What is a network? Well, it's a meeting place or a community or a hub, if you like. It's like the Forum from ancient Rome, or the Market Day from old Britain, or potentially bringing things a little bit more current to the online social networks that dominate both ours and our wider family's lives and attention these days. So in other words, it's a place to meet, to exchange ideas, to ask questions and find answers, and also to do business with like-minded individuals. And when I say like-minded, it's not always the case that the individual we're going to talk to are like-minded. There's a variety of different attitudes and opinions that you might find even in the collective, such as property investors and associated service providers. But there's certainly going to be some similar interests and common objectives at least. So that's the idea really, to be I was going to say lurking is probably not the right phrase, to be milling in those sorts of environments with like-minded people. So after perhaps if you've lucked out and you've got friends and family who really do know what they're talking about in terms of property investing, perhaps the second network that I might encourage you to seek out would be where obviously property investors are going to be hanging out. And I really should say networks, because there's plenty of those to choose from. And they're both real life networks, but they're also virtual. In fact, actually, quite a lot of them are virtual these days. So you can do an awful lot of networking just without leaving home. But of course, there's nothing better than getting out there and meeting people, and we'll come to that later. Now, some of these networking groups are organised pretty well. Some of them are organised quite loosely. Some of them are, a bit haphazard, and some of them are very professionally managed. So let's just take a quick whistle-stop tour and discover a little bit more about the types of network that we could get involved in. Now, I've kind of hinted already about when I talked about social groups and social media that there's places like Facebook and LinkedIn and Google+, which are examples of social networks. And there's a lot of property investor groups that can be found in those places as well. It's very easy to find them. And I did a quick look up recently, and I noticed that some of the groups out there are running into tens of thousands of people in size now. And that's, just in the UK. I've seen some international ones which are very large, and you might expect that with an international community. But even in the UK now, I think one of the groups I saw on Facebook is approaching 20,000 people. So, it's quite a significant number. So all I would say is, given that there are so many groups in the first place and different channels that we could choose from, and indeed so many people that are going to frequent these places, do choose wisely. Have a look around, try and identify with the culture or the way things are done within that particular community. You'll get a feel for looking at the types of posts and questions, and really look at the responses. I've been quite surprised and in fact taken aback at times by how people, especially online, can adopt an approach that I wouldn't necessarily expect them to adopt if they were standing right in front of me. So do check out wisely. Have a little look before you go too far into these some of these communities at least. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide some links to some of the major social networking communities that I tend to hang around in the show notes, so you can check out these for yourself. So aside from the networks that harness the big social machines of Facebook and that and the like, there are also networks that have set up their own communities in dedicated forums. The three that I can be found in quite regularly are Property Tribes, the Property Hub, and to a lesser extent PVP1.05. Now, the idea of a forum is broad, but it's a bit more of a dedicated platform or system than, say, Facebook or LinkedIn is. And therefore it's often easier to find your way around, search and navigate for topics and posts that are and articles that are of interest to you. So it can make it a little bit easier to navigate, as I mentioned. Now some of these are going to require some form of membership commitment, but usually they offer, all it's going to cost you is an email address to sign up. So very low level of commitment, as it were, but there you go. The next major category of network are the real life ones, the physical ones, with real people meeting in person, and this is in the form typically of live property meetings and events, where you're going to find our lesser spotted brethren, as I call it. Now, meetings are run all over the country every single month. There's probably every single day of the month, actually. There'll be an opportunity to meet fellow investors and perhaps hear a guest speaker in one of those property meetings. Now, I've probably freaked about half of you out at this point in time. Especially the more introverted types, when I've perhaps suggested live face-to-face meetings. Perhaps the suggestion of going out to a property meeting and risking someone either thrusting their hand in front of you, or worse still, their business card, might actually cause you shock and horror and great fear. But I would say this: it's definitely worth it, at least in the early stages, just to put ourselves out there and meet different people and see what's going on. But just final piece of advice on that topic of the property communities. I always try and tell people, leave your credit cards at home. That's all I'm going to say on that matter. So as I mentioned, I'm going to provide some links in the show notes, so don't forget to check those out. But after looking at some of the people and how we can meet them in terms of networks, let's have a look at some other sources of knowledge in property. And as with people and networking side of this episode, there are some distinct advantages in getting up to speed with this business we're now in. Now, what I intend to talk about, what I will intend to talk about later is formal property education. So today I'm just going to mention it in passing. So keep that in mind, that I'm not necessarily talking about formal property education today. I'm talking about general property education and perhaps where we can go to find that out. Now, there are benefits, and I just kind of list them out really. The benefits of getting educated in property is that it can make us more professional. Then we know what we're doing. It is a profession, it's a business. We should get up to speed. It also opens our eyes to all sorts of possibilities and opportunities, and not just plain old vanilla buy-to-let. There's nothing wrong with plain old vanilla buy-to-let, but there are lots of other ways of making money in property and strategies and that sort of thing. So it's good to broaden our mind and open our thinking to these possibilities. Now, it can help reduce our risk by increasing our awareness and understanding. It can also accelerate our growth and progress, on our property investing journey. And of course, it introduces us to alternative ways of looking at things and doing things. As a result of understanding, of course, it can help us to problem solve and therefore avoid mistakes. And probably I might be alone in this, I'm not sure, but I think it's just fun. And why not learn about what we're doing? So for me, there we go. There's a summary of some of the benefits, and hopefully you're sold on the idea of getting up to speed with your property education too. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the other places we can go to get ourselves educated. Probably the starting signpost would be landlord associations, and there's two main landlord associations in this country. There's the National Landlords Association, or the NLA, and there's the Residential Landlords Association, or the RLA. I think I need to put my teeth in today. But both of these offer plenty of information and training and events and that sort of thing. But they also offer an accreditation scheme where landlords can actually get formally accredited by going through a program of study through it can be in a sort of classroom type of style, but it could also be online. And as you'll hear, in the lettings episode, when we get to that stage, I am in fact an advocate of getting accredited. Especially if we're not going to be using a letting agent, I think it's important that we know what we're doing. But even if we are going to be using an agent, it makes sense to get accredited. There's just so many responsibilities, and therefore so many things that we could fall foul of, really, if we don't understand what we're doing. So these accreditation schemes therefore are very, very useful. And on a similar vein, there are industry associations and bodies. There's quite a few I mentioned in the book, but I just kind of wanted to call out one particular here, and that's the Property Ombudsman, which fundamentally offers information and, actually offers protection, really, consumer protection, for those people who are dealing with agents and companies in the area of sales and letting. So it's worth checking out them, and of course there are some other ones as well, which you can look up to. So apart from those, very dedicated industry associations, if I can call them that, what other sources of knowledge and information are there that we could look towards? Well, we've got the national press, of course, and some of them have dedicated property sections. So when I say the national press, I'm talking about the newspapers. And I particularly recommend the Telegraph and This Is Money, because both of those have got some very excellent property sections that I genuinely would recommend that you look out for. There are other ones, but they're probably two very, very good ones. Of course, there's the online industry press, and Property Reporter is one of those, and Property Industry Eye is another, and they come at it from slightly different angles, one from more an agent's point of view, one from more generalistic property point of view. But they're useful in bringing us up to date with what the latest news and happenings is. I particularly like some of the magazines that are out there now, and one of the most established, and I think the layout and the structure of it is the Your Property Network, or YPN magazine. Now there are others out there, and there are new ones coming out as well. I haven't seen the new one at time of recording this episode, but so I can't give a real shout out to that. But the Your Property Network magazine is excellent because it has a lot of case studies, and I think that a lot of people relate to that type of thing. But of course, I can't leave this section without mentioning the Property Voice blog and newsfeed itself, www.thepropertyvoice.net. And I'm sure you already subscribe to our mailing list to stay up to date. You do, don't you? Yeah, just head over and drop your name in that little email box if you don't, and I won't hold it against you, I promise you. So we are actually increasingly part of the digital age, and therefore we've got new media, things like podcasts, obviously like this, and video channels that are becoming increasingly more popular and commonplace for methods of digesting learning. So make sure you have a browse around both iTunes and YouTube. There are other providers, of course, which host these types of media, but they're the big ones, iTunes and YouTube, and see what else is out there in terms of the free resources under this heading of new media, as I mentioned. Now, I really should make mention of books before I close, and if you followed me for any length of time, then you may know that in addition, obviously, to writing a book myself, I really do like a good read, particularly in property and or personal development. Now, I've had my highs and lows, I must say, in terms of reading. I've had dedicated periods of time where I've been very diligent, but I've had other periods of time where, perhaps haven't had the motivation or I would use the word time, but we can always make time for things that are important, I found. So it's probably an excuse in reality. But I've got something of a solution that I want to present to you a little bit later on in the episode. And that might help with, if you feel similarly, perhaps you're up and down with reading, or perhaps you have a lack of commitment to reading as well. So I would strongly advocate reading, particularly on the subject of property, of course. And I've written a blog post about my top 5 books in, I say in property, but top 5 books. And this was based on a request from Vanessa Warwick at Property Tribes. I'll share some of those findings in a minute, but I've also got a reading challenge going on, and so I've gone public with my annual goal of reading 2 books per month, and that's publicly stated on my blog, and I do monthly updates just to share where I'm going with that. And fortunately, thanks in particular to Audible, I'm well ahead of target, for this particular year. But I want you to keep in mind what I did there. I had a written goal and went public with it, and I'll return to that concept in a minute. So I did mention the top 5 books, and I'm just going to whistle through these quite quickly. Perhaps good starting point for anyone. Here's some books. They're not all property related directly, but they can all be applied to property, I would say. So probably the first one to mention is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and nearly everybody in property is going to suggest that you read this book, and I'm no different. I definitely think you should read it, and it really taught me the value of assets and passive income. So big shout out to that book. The next one is the Richest Man in Babylon, and that really sets out very simply, in a nice neat parable style actually, the keys to long-term wealth creation, and it's a nice handy little book. Now, a bit heavier perhaps is a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and this is particularly relevant if you're not sure what your purpose is, you don't have a clear purpose. Now, this is an amazing story of somebody who found a purpose in the most awful of conditions. So I won't spoil it for you, but it can be a bit heavy at times, I have to say. But on the other hand, it does teach you to be grateful for what you do have, even if you're striving for a better future and a better life. So there's a good shout out. The next one is the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, this is a personal development and personal growth book actually, and I read this in my mid-20s, and it had a tremendous effect on me when I was in the corporate career at that time, and some of the concepts have never left me, and obviously it's made it to the list, so I'd recommend it to you too. And then a book that I've been surprising a few people by recommending. It's not that well known. It's How to Get Rich Not Quick, and all these links will be in the show notes, so don't worry about that. But it's this one's a budgeting book in all honesty. Simple budgeting book, and how we can actually set aside more and more money for saving and that type of thing, but with some tools and resources directly available from the author. Oh, and did I mention, I said 5, didn't I? But there's a decent looking book called the Property Investor Toolkit, a 7-part toolkit for property investment success, and that's been written by a very nice chap who you might know about. So, but anyway, in all honesty, in that book, there's several reading lists that I've outlined, and in fact, it numbers over 100 books if you read the full reading list. So, just give a bit of a call out to that too. So, as I mentioned, I did set myself a book reading challenge this year, and that was to read at least 2 books per month. And fortunately, I'm well ahead of target at the moment. And I can attribute a lot of the achievement to going public with that goal and committing to write up on my progress every month. Now, of course, if I've gone public and I've told everybody that I'm going to read 2 books every month and I'm going to report back every month, if I've missed that target, then it's going to be at least embarrassing. So I've held myself accountable, if you like. And my challenge is for you to do the same, really. Not necessarily to have the same reading goal as me. You might read more, you might read less, but just to have a reading goal. And then to commit it into writing. Now, what you can do, perhaps, if you like, is head over to any one of those blog posts. I'm doing a new post every single month with the updates to my challenge. And there's a comments box at the end of each post. And why not just drop in a comment there and just let me know what your book reading challenge is. And perhaps you can come back each month and let me know how you're doing with your goal. I think, if we do it together, it's going to help us stay motivated, wouldn't you say? And just think about it for a minute. If you were to read 2 books per month, then that's 24 books in a year. And of course, if we multiply that over a 4-year period, we've read every single book that I've mentioned in my extended reading list. It's about 100 books, which is a staggering amount actually when you think about it. And it's quite possibly more than the average university student as well. So that's really some food for thought, how much knowledge that we're going to take in over that period of time just by reading. So I just want to wrap up this section by returning to something I've kind of been hinting at or touching on without really making it explicit. And that's the idea of support and accountability in our property investing and knowledge acquisition journey in particular. I'll return to this concept in a later episode. However, today's subject is so close to the issue that I really feel I should mention it now. And I just think that if we can have someone to work alongside, we stand a better chance of staying motivated and staying on course. Now, so what I'd really like to finish by saying is, why not consider getting yourself some kind of accountability partner or within an accountability group. Now, it might be a property buddy, if I can call him that, a property business or personal development mastermind group, or it could be a property coach or mentor on a more formal basis. But just think about how much more you could learn or how much further you can push yourself by choosing actually to hold yourself accountable to other people. In a similar way to how I've gone public on my reading challenge, it works like that really. So it's pretty powerful. The only thing I would say is just choose wisely. Choose wisely who you partner up with. So for now, I'm just going to leave you with that seed germ of an idea and let it take root before I return to it in a couple of episodes or so. So in conclusion, we can and arguably should get out there, whether it's virtually or in reality, to meet other property investors. We can immerse ourselves into a variety of different ways to develop our knowledge and perhaps set ourselves that reading challenge that I mentioned. And finally, if we want to grow, start thinking about teaming up in some way with a buddy, mastermind group or a mentor. And you won't know unless you try, will you? So that about covers it today for the property chatter segment. So why not join me on my reading challenge with your own particular journey? That'd be brilliant.
Up next is Your Voice. It's all about you and your property world.
We have another 5-star listener review to share now, Richard. Here goes. Here is a 5-star review from GU, who says, "There are quite a few property podcasts around at the moment, but this one still stands out from the crowd. It's very well produced, easy to listen to and packed with information. The computer assistant Kaza makes it very original too. I'm so pleased that I have another very enjoyable source of property info. Thank you so much for that kind review, GU. I am blushing with the praise and the mention of my name. If you would like to leave us a review, then please try and do that sometime, as it will help us to get noticed. I did see that someone gave a 1-star rating, surely a mistake. But if you think we deserve 5 stars like Moxie Morris last week and Jiu this week, then have your say is all I can ask. Next up, your voice this week is in the form of a listener, who responded to our simple question posed on our social media channels. It comes from Nick Thorpe, a property investor located in Huddersfield, that's up north in case you didn't know. Richard has just finished reading the book The One Thing, and so he asked, what is the one thing you know now, that you wished you knew when you started investing in property? Here is what Nick had to say. I wish I'd have known the importance of having a reason why bigger than myself and beyond finance. When times are busy and priorities are muddled, that is what now drives me through. Wow. What a great piece of advice that is. Now, if you recall, we talked about having a clear purpose or reason why in an earlier episode, didn't we? I like the distinction that it might not always be financial very much here. By the way, Nick, we think you are amazing, magnificent and modest too, even if that only makes sense between us right now. It is fantastic to get these listener contributions. It helps to make the show real for you, So please do share your funny stories, moans or property questions, either by emailing the show at podcast@thepropertyvoice.net, or use SpeakPipe if you want to hear your voice on the radio instead. That's your voice for this week then, have a reason why to keep you going. Now, back to you Richard for the shout out.
And now, where you can go for more great resources with the shout out.
Okay, thanks Kaza for dealing with the your voice for this week. What a powerful message that was, and hopefully we'll hear more from more of you out there. But today's shout out, possibly after giving you a reason to idle away some time last week by suggesting you might play a game, even if it was an educational one, I'm probably feeling a little bit guilty, and so I'm going to shout out today a much more practical tool that you can use. And the resource I'm going to be giving a shout out today is called LHA Direct. LHA Direct. And that's a handy portal that allows you to check the local housing allowance in a specific area by house size, number of bedrooms in effect. And it's essential to know this if there is an intention to rent to tenants claiming benefits, obviously, as that's the maximum allowance that the tenants would receive from the government for their housing. Now, of course, you could ask them to top up the rent themselves, but that probably seems quite unlikely, especially in the current climate of trying to keep a cap on benefits generally, and therefore there'll be limited means for those tenants to afford extra money. Now, you might be thinking something like, but I don't rent to tenants on benefits, Richard, so that's not really of much use to me, is it? So I'm going to challenge that thought. Well, actually, it is of use to you. Now, knowing the LHA rate, we can actually plot a worst case scenario in our calculations. Now, if you remember, I've recommended that we do more than one type of calculation when we're assessing or evaluating our deals. So I tend to look at a best and a worst, and maybe a mid case or an expected case basis. So knowing what the LHA rate probably helps us plug in the rental figures for pretty much a worst case scenario, because we'll know we're going to get that kind of money from a benefits claimant in any case. But the other thing with the LHA rate is that what it is calculated based on the 30th percentile of the average rents in the area for equivalent properties. Now, I'm no mathematical genius, and so I cannot, tell you how to convert that into a true average rental figure, or the minimum and the maximum. In fact, I'm not even sure there is a way. But fortunately, the website that I've just referred to has got all of that information ready for you as well. So it's got a handy little graph which shows the spread of rents in that local area as well. So the highs and the lows, and how many properties have got everything in between as well. So that's pretty useful as well. So that'll help us to plug in the best case scenarios and even an expected case scenario. So anyone who is interested in research will probably find this a very useful little tool. It can be used in more than one way, I would say. Oh, and just one final point. The LHA Direct link also shows room rates, not just for full property rates. So it's pretty helpful as well if you're looking at HMOs, and you can undertake a similar exercise for HMOs as with whole properties. So there we go. That's today's shout out, and hopefully I'm giving you back something a little bit more practical, as I mentioned, but it also happens to conclude yet another week of the Property Voice podcast. I really hope you've enjoyed the show, and if I could leave you with one idea to consider over this next week, perhaps aside from networking and reading challenges, which I'm sure that you've absorbed from today's episode, it would be this. Now, just think about how you can get involved in the show. We'd really love to hear from you in whichever way suits you best. Obviously, we've heard from Nick today, we'd heard from Andy in the past, we've had a couple of questions, but I'd like to see a little bit more engagement if that's possible. So head over to the show notes on the website. It's got all the links of everything I've mentioned in today's show. Check all that out, pop a comment in the box and just say hi. That'd be great to hear from you. Until next time on the Property Voice podcast, therefore, ciao ciao.
Ciao ciao.
Thank you for listening today. Now head over to thepropertyvoice.net for more inspirational content and get updates through our mailing list. Join us next time on the Property Voice podcast. And if you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to rate us on iTunes.